This is the E-commerce Edge podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It is my great pleasure to welcome Jamie SAPP from the Eighth Notch to the podcast. Welcome, Jamie.
Hey, Jason, how you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And we were talking off air that you are dialing in from Alamo, California. And I told you, even though I'm originally from Southern California, I had no idea where Alamo was from, but you're on the East Bay there just on the outskirts of San Fran.
We are.
And you love it there? How long you been there?
We moved back here in 2015, actually. So lived out here for a little while. I'll back up. Originally from Georgia, moved the family and kids out here for the first tour duty back in 2005, left in 2009, heading back to Atlanta, and then got the call to come back to the craziest part of the world and decided, let's give it a shot. So we've been here ever since.
Yeah, I guess if you're doing the software thing, that's definitely one of the best places to be located. It's definitely an epicenter of tech. There's no question about that.
Yeah, especially retail and software is really big. That's the original reason for coming back out here was working with Williams-Sonoma. So big retail hotbed as well as technology.
Yeah, and look, Williams-Sonoma, that's a great segue into kind of how you got into this space. And before we talk about the Eighth Notch and how it came to be and what it is you guys do and why, let's talk maybe a little bit about how you even got into this space. And you were in insurance before. You've been in a few different industries, but then it feels this whole retail-focused career, this tech-focused, maybe even e-commerce-focused career, maybe a bit of a stretch, but you were the SVP of tech at Williams-Sonoma, and Williams-Sonoma has been at the forefront of lots of cool digital tech for a very long time. In fact, I think they were one of the first merchants in the world to implement SuiteCommerce Advanced on top of NetSuite as their e-commerce platform of choice. And they were the poster child of SuiteCommerce Advanced for a long time. And they were doing stuff on the platform. And even prior to that, they were doing stuff from a retail, omni-channel, and e-com thing that they were doing stuff that lots of other people weren't doing. They were doing levels of personalization that no one else was doing at the time.
Absolutely. They definitely figured out that the e-commerce boom was going to boom long before everybody else did, and they had to really lean into it. From the days of the catalog to the days of e-commerce was a great segue for them.
Yeah, and you were there, I guess, just long enough to really get your feet wet on that whole retail tech, e-com tech space. You're there for almost 5 years. That's not a short stint.
Yeah, and I did actually. I was there almost 10 years. I guess the first tour duty was with Williams-Sonoma back in the 05-09 timeframe. And then came back out again in 15. And I'll kind of, my background is really around it's not really the back end of technology, but it's everything except for the infrastructure and the actual websites themselves. So my skill set was really around anything that makes the company move, sell, finance, ERP, logistics, supply chain, merchandising was really where I had the pleasure of being a part of.
This is what I like to call the operational tech stack. That's what I like to call it, because I tell you, it is the nuts and bolts that make a business run and be efficient and to be profitable and be sustainable at the end of the day. And if you don't have those things, if you don't have a rock solid operational core, it almost doesn't matter what kind of UX you're creating on the front end. If you can't deliver on your promise as a brand, then you got real problems.
That's true. And you're the first person to also be called when we have problems. There was a lot of fun. We had, to your point, Williams-Sonoma was always very creative on a lot of stuff. And supply chain was one of those things. Merchandising, all those things, they really leaned into the best way to do it.
And that leads us to taking that operational and technical skill set and fusing those together and deciding to bring a technical platform to market in the Eighth Notch. Your CEO, founder of the Eighth Notch, been doing this for nearly 5 years now, 5 years after this Williams-Sonoma stint. And what caused you? Was it just scratching an itch? Was it you said, hey, I see a gap in the market because of my unique background and skills and experience? What was it that told you the world needs the Eighth Notch? We need this technology platform in the world.
That's a great question. Let me take you a little further back on the career, and it'll probably help explain where the idea got created. A long time ago, before Williams-Sonoma, before healthcare technology and insurance technology, I actually worked 10 years at UPS supply chain, what we call the non-brown side of UPS. And that's really where I was really first introduced to supply chain logistics and international logistics warehousing. And that was really where a lot of my early learnings took place. Fast forward to Williams-Sonoma, and still in the supply chain, still in logistics, still trying to figure out how to make the best product and get it delivered to the end consumer. And I had this idea after leaving Williams-Sonoma it's hard to describe how I had the idea. Let's just say that I'm an incredibly spiritual person, and I think all things happen through God's plan. But having said that, this idea
divine intervention.
I couldn't get this idea out of my head, Jason. It kept sitting there and it kept coming back, and I kept just ignoring it until I had nothing else to do and I couldn't ignore it. So I might as well lean into it. And the idea was actually a fairly simple one, which is there has to be a way to optimize the delivery supply chain process for everyone involved. And if you just think about the process today, what happens is somebody goes to the website, they buy something, goes through all of its security and fraud and drops down from that to the order management system. Order management system drops it to the warehouse management system. The warehouse management system, then somebody takes it and a warehouse is really trained to work on it at whatever pace they're normally used to working on it. Normally it's drops today, ship it tomorrow. It's a very FIFO method, first in, first out kind of approach. They do that, they pick it, they pack it, they box it, they put a label on it, and then they give it to the carrier. And the carrier is the very first time the carrier sees what they need to do with this, and the carriers, they're baked. All they can do is put it in their network, and every carrier now is designed, especially the parcel world, is designed to go deliver it. And they just put it through the trucks in their network and hub and spoke, and it gets to the final sort hub, and it gets put on a truck, and it gets delivered to your house. The big idea is, what if you could move that process from that label creation? What if you could move that process upstream, either in checkout or near real-time checkout, and actually have a collaborative decision be made between the shipper and the carrier in such a way that would be most beneficial for everyone, and including the end consumer over time. So that was the big idea of, what if you could, instead of dropping it and executing the plan, what if you could actually determine the plan before you dropped it? And I reached out to friends of mine in the industry, the parcel industry, and said, I got an idea. And they all said, boy, if you could actually do that, we'd be very interested. And so away we went to go build it.
And you say on your website, the best route to a sustainable mile is the one never driven. And additionally, you say, look, speed and sustainability aren't mutually exclusive, which I totally agree. And it says, if retailers and carriers coordinate, efficiency and opportunity will reign, which is pretty impressive. Now, where did even the name, the eighth notch, come from? What does it mean? And then we'll start talking a little bit deeper about the tech. But I'm guessing that, seeing as how you're a spiritual person, the name was selected for a very specific reason in itself.
It was. My dad was a railroad man for 46 years. He was a carman, which is fancy word for saying he's a train inspector. And we grew up in a small town in deep South Georgia where it was all about trains. And the eighth notch is the most powerful setting on a locomotive engine. So I just figured it'd be a kind of a cool thing to call a company that I think my dad, if he were still with us, would be excited about.
Love it. And so who are your customers? Are they the carriers themselves? Are they the merchants, to where you are effectively a freight management, a shipping management platform that gets plugged into the e-commerce front end? Is it a bit of both? Is it a middleware platform that takes over from the point where a customer places an order, or does it actually control the presentation of the shipping options to the customer in real time? Where do you sit within the stack? Because it seems like you're not part of a WMS, you're not part of the OMS, but you bridge the gap between those systems and the carrier systems?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're a little niche of any of those. So the best way to describe us is our relationship is with the carrier. We have a contract with the parcel carrier. The parcel carrier introduces us to their customers. Their customers are any shippers, retailers. It could be any shipper that uses their network. We then work with the shipper to integrate our system into their order management system or their WMS system or their shipping platform. In some cases, we have a couple of examples where we're integrating right before the label's being printed, and instead of going down shipper X, if we see that we can actually optimize, it goes down shipper Y. And I should tell you what that optimization really is. It's all about reducing delivery stops in the network. And what that basically means is every parcel carrier is trying to get density. That is the biggest opportunity for parcel carriers. Can I put more packages in the back of the truck when I'm making a delivery? So instead of going to Jason's house 3 times in a week, what if I could go to Jason's house once in a week with all of the packages that I would have delivered in those 3 different times? If I do that, then I spread the cost of that delivery one time across all of those packages. To them, that is what they're all trying to get for, is how do I get a reduction of cost? Now, the carrier partnership that we have, what they'll do is when we can reduce that stop, they'll gain share that savings with the shipper themselves. So effectively reducing their per unit cost of transportation. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I wonder also if you are also playing the role of carrier aggregator too. So a lot of e-commerce platforms they'll say, look, we need a carrier aggregation plug into that, and it usually also owns both the front end experience in terms of basically grabbing real-time rates based on the composition of the cart from a range of 4, 5, 6 carriers, picking the best one, or presenting 2, 3 service levels with their individual price points there for the customer to select from. And then when it comes to the pick, pack, dispatch phase of the effort, usually they also are the ones that print the label and they download the orders, they print the labels, and they lodge the consignments with carriers themselves for pickup. And so there is that carrier aggregator concept, which there's probably 50 major carrier aggregator platforms that operate in the USA, but it feels like you plug some of those gaps too.
Yeah, we definitely stayed away from that carrier aggregator methodology and mentality. What we do is we give you the best choice. We give you a best choice price for a very specific action. And that action is delivery density. So what we tell the retailer is we have a package that's going to this address of this order you just sent me. We see inside the carrier network that there are other packages going to that same address from some other shipper that we don't even know who they are. We just see that, hey, by the way, I think carrier is going to that same address next Monday. This one order that I have in front of me, can I also get this order there to arrive on Monday as well? If the answer is yes, because I need to ship it today or I need to ship it tomorrow, we say, ship it today. And if it ships today, based on the time and transit table that we have loaded for this particular retailer, it will also arrive on Monday with that other package that's coming from some other place. So basically what we're doing is we're engineering it in such a way where they all arrive at the sort hub on the same day, and the carrier then puts it onto their delivery truck for delivery to that address. So that action itself, we don't aggregate. We're only talking about one carrier, and we're exclusive to that carrier. But I can see your point where if I were rate shopping and the carrier gives a better rate for this sustainable delivery or for this synchronized delivery, then this would be the choice that you want to pick, especially if you were doing it at checkout. And we definitely see that what we have turned on is post-checkout. We absolutely see this moving upstream into checkout in the very near future, because it's a great way for retailers, specifically where they're giving away free shipping, to at least make a plan as to why I want to give away free shipping. Or if I have to give away free shipping, at least it's a cheaper option for me to do it. If you can wait for a day or 2 or 3 and you pick that sustainable delivery option at checkout, then I can actually give this to you free. Because, by the way, you're saving the environment to do it. Because every time we create one of these merges and I deliver it together, we're saving 800 grams of CO2. So that is in itself and the carrier actually shares in that savings with those carbon.
And so everybody's got their own take on carbon and so I won't wade into the politics of that because I got my own views on this. But quite apart from that, it feels like then we could consider you a middleware platform that sits between the shipper and a carrier aggregator or a direct integration with that merchant's checkout. And so effectively, you act as the middleman, middle player, middle tech platform that sits between what would normally be just the carrier's API layer that we're going to go and we're going to send them the volumetric size of this cart, and we're going to say, okay, give us a rate, and you're going to say, okay, maybe we add one additional service level called the sustainable service level or whatever we want to name it.
Great.
So we're now going to give, instead of just giving one response back from the API layer, which is to say, yep, we can ship it and here's what it's going to cost. Now we're going to give them two options that can then be presented into the checkout to the customer. If they're willing to wait a little bit longer for that shipment for whatever reason, and maybe we share the benefit of that cost savings with the customer, maybe we don't, whatever it might be. Maybe we just rely on their goodwill to say, hey, look, I'm not in a hurry for it, so let's do the right thing by aggregating these shipments together with other people's. Now you're effectively providing them another available service level because of the data you have available through your platform.
That's correct. And I think you've nailed it fairly succinctly on we're in that in between. We integrate with the shipper. We get their order information, and then we integrate with the carrier and we get their delivery information for that address. And then we see if we can tie those things together. And if we can, we say, you know what we did, and here's the action you shipper need to do. Ship it today, ship it tomorrow, or don't ship it yet at all. I don't know yet. I'm still looking. But if you give me time to look,
I'll find it.
I'll find it all within the promise window that you've already given your end consumer. So one of the things that we say is we don't go beyond what you've already promised. So we'll stay within that bounds, and X percentage of the time, for some shippers, it might only be 5% of the time. For some, it might be 25% of the time. We'll find a connection for you, depending on the type of shipper it is. And when we give you that connection, you ship it on the date that we tell you to. The carrier wins. They gain share back the savings. The shipper wins because they actually get the savings. And to your point, they may or may not share that with the end consumer. And the smart ones will start to think through how they can actually start doing that, though.
And is it ultimately your vision that your platform would be cross-network, meaning that, okay, cool, this particular carrier has a partnership with this carrier. We now have enough data and enough connections from multiple networks that we can say, okay, maybe we can't slipstream this in with one of your truck's deliveries or whatever, but we know that you have a partnership with this other carrier and we can see across their network too. And we can say, okay, at this hub or whatever it might be, we can then hand that off to a partner carrier and aggregate. So is it ultimately your vision that this is cross-network, not just operating across just one carrier's capabilities at a time?
Yeah, most shippers they generally have a single carrier, or they have multi-carrier, but there's a line share of the network that's done by one or the other. As we move out of exclusivity for this one carrier and go into it for any carrier in the parcel network, I do see that where we're connecting them. I'm not sure I see our vision as that in between that figures out which is the best carrier to use, other than there's a merge and there's density to be created. That might be the only pinpoint that we do. There are some interesting things you can do beyond just density. You can do today we're directly connecting to an actual address, but we have the ability to also connect to a subdivision, an apartment. So I'm not getting the exact address, but I'm getting nearby. And there's
like a catchment area, basically.
And there's savings associated with that as well. If I don't have to move the truck and I can deliver two different packages across the street from each other, there's definitely savings there. Or there's the third part, which I think is going to be the unlock. The biggest unlock over time is smoothing the network. Any parcel carrier gets hammered on Tuesday, Wednesday, because they get all the backlog from the weekend and people shopping. So they rush like crazy for the Tuesday and Wednesday rush, and then it lightens up Thursday, Friday. But what if you could smooth the network in such a way where I don't have to have that big rush or that overtime pay or those multiple trucks or those multiple people delivering on a Tuesday and Wednesday? What if you could move that out one day to Thursday? Still, the end consumer gets their packages. They still get it within their promise window. They may not even know anything's different, but it's now you can start to normalize the delivery network across either across the entire U.S. or specific pinpointed origin destination addresses, because you're just overloaded in those areas. And I think that will be a big unlock, but I think it's still carrier specific. I don't think we'll ever sit in the middle, kind of playing this traffic cop of who's the best carrier to use for this. It'll be specific based on the contract that shipper has with that carrier.
Hey team, I have a big favor to ask you. Please pause this episode and send the link of this episode to someone you know that you think would enjoy this content. Really appreciate you spreading the word. This is how we grow. We're not a Joe Rogan. We don't have big, massive advertising budgets, but we absolutely want to grow. We want to get the learnings from all of these episodes out to as wide of an audience as possible, and we need your help to do it. Thank you, and now back to your listening. Sure, definitely makes sense. And what was behind your initial decision to limit this to one carrier engagement? I think we could probably guess who that is, given your background with UPS. We can probably take a wild guess at who you might be working with. But what was behind? Was it purely based on, hey, we want to work with one carrier and one carrier network initially to refine the platform, to nail it down, to make it perfect for this use case before we start to broaden our reach and go out and broaden our market? Was it really, this is our beta, this is our design customer, basically our design partner that's going to help us nail down exactly what this technology needs to be very useful to the industry?
Yeah, actually, it wasn't. We reached out to all the parcel carriers of all the ones you could think of and said, I got an idea. And we got pretty high up and most of the companies and had the conversation. And it was basically he or she who gets their first wins. And it just so happens that the carrier that we was starting to do business with, they came back and said, hey, we've been trying to solve for this for a while. We've got some tool sets that we built a while ago that kind of helped us, but it's not built for commercial use across the entire shipper network. And well, if you could figure that out for us, we'd be interested. And so that's what led us down the path that we went down.
Love it. And that was actually going to be my next question, which is that I would assume that every major carrier, because there's potentially millions and potentially billions of dollars at stake here in terms of being able to aggregate those shipments together in a smart way. It's almost like, I think of it almost like demand planning, but in reverse in a way. And I think it's route demand planning is what we're really drilling down to here. And I would have just assumed that every single major carrier would have to do this just to make doing what they, because the thing is that logistics is such a marginal game, and it's so complex. It is so difficult to manage, and it is so difficult to be profitable with. All you have to do is look at FedEx and look at a couple of the other major players out there and look at what's happened to them over the last few years, especially in competition with Amazon, and how difficult of a business freight and logistics, basically haulage of any kind, it is just massively competitive. It is just, it's such a marginal game that even a 1 or 2 or 3% improvement in efficiency can dramatically impact the bottom line profitability of the business.
You're absolutely right. I think, I'm trying to remember who said this. I think it was UPS's CEO a year or two ago said that and I think the numbers were a 10% gain in delivery density is a $300 million a year savings to their operational network. I think that's the number two, right? It's close to that. So to your point, it doesn't take a big percentage increase to make massive improvements across the network. And I suspect that every parcel carrier is trying to figure out how to unlock this. And to your point about the Amazon, I'll say this about the software. If you could go back and redesign software right now, I had a CEO of a software company once tell me, if you could go back and redesign software, you wouldn't have all of these silos that we have today. Everything would be linked across the top, sharing the master data and the whole 9 yards. It would be so much more efficient. Well, think about the carrier networks as well, right? If you could redesign the networks, not based off of 50 or 100 years ago, you could redesign them as today, it would be massively different. Now, take them up what Amazon is actually trying to build. They didn't start from, they started from, hey, what are they doing right or wrong? And what can I actually mimic and or improve on? And it's why you see at checkout, Amazon asks, do you want your package delivered in the same box or in the same truck? That is their version of delivery density behind the scenes, or the Amazon day. So they started thinking through early on, because they own the complete channel, was there a way to impact the delivery process in such a way that it's the most efficient for us? So I don't have to go to your house 3 or 4 times. I can actually go once or twice, and maybe I can incentivize you for it, or maybe not. Maybe you'll just lean into it because I'll take it all together because I don't have to go chase packages.
Yeah.
So I think they're all looking at that going, not only is the most up and coming competition starting to think about this and starting to look at it, but how do I unlock this? And they're all logistics delivery companies. They do something incredibly well, right? They deliver stuff, and it is remarkable to see that process in action. It is actually, if you're a geek about how operations
Logistics
work,
is sexy, man.
If you're an industrial engineer, you go in there and you go, oh, wow. So they do it incredibly well. All of them do it incredibly well. So if you can improve that process by just linking the silos together in such a way that's never been done, and it doesn't cost anything. It's the same CEO once told me, this is our product is the most incredible product. It doesn't cost anything to implement. We don't charge to implement it. No one pays the software fee like you would if you were buying software. The only change of money is if there's a savings in the actual stop, then the gain share of that savings is distributed about. That's it. So it's only when there's hard dollar savings do people actually win. He goes, it's the most craziest model I've ever seen, and it works.
It's the skin in the game model. I love it. And how important is AI and machine learning to your software? Because it seems, because of the volume of data that you're trying to look at and manage and draw correlations between, that maybe you wouldn't assume that there's a correlation between these two data points. It feels like the perfect use case for AI and machine learning to help drive some of these efficiencies.
We definitely use machine learning to understand and address. And is there a propensity for recency and frequency of that address from a delivery perspective? So we only use it around the tool set we're doing for synchronized delivery, meaning I've got this address and we're really starting to lean in, and our AI has been turned on around, do I need to actually go to the carrier and see if there's an upcoming delivery, or can I make an assumption that there is going to be a delivery for this address based off of, boy, this address gets a lot of deliveries, and we can see it in our model that there's a big chance they're going, or the vice versa. Do I even need to ask about this address? And to your point, because we have so many orders coming at us, I may not have time to go look at an address, so I just throw it away. I don't even need to look. It's never going to have a hit against it. And if I do that, do I give up anything in the merge potential over time? So we're really starting to train the models right now to say there are a lot of addresses, not going to get anything. Don't waste your time. Don't use the machine. Don't use the time available. Just let it go. Give them back a no merge. A shipper does what they need to do in order to pick, pack, and ship it, but only stay focused on those addresses that are really meaningful, that have a chance to really hit the potential merge opportunity.
And I guess the expansion of, sorry to interrupt, I guess the expansion of this will really come into play when you're starting to expand outside of a single address into a zone or a catchment or a postcode or anything like that. The moment that you expand outside of a single address into a building or into a business park or whatever it might be, I think it feels like that's when an exponentially greater opportunity to merge those shipments comes into play.
Absolutely. Yeah. The software links it down to proximity, or what we call proximity merge, but we're focused on actual address today, but proximity would also make a big hit against, it's an apartment building and I've got 20 different doors that I'm actually or I'm delivering everything to a postal area inside that apartment building. Everything's connected here. Drop it off. You're right. That's, and And as we get smarter with the AI and we figure out, can I get a hit rate greater than 20%? Can I keep it one extra day because there's an opportunity that one extra day gives me an extra 5% of potential merge. There's a lot of things to be done there around the AI and it's not complicated. And I'm able actually to say it's not complicated because I don't actually understand it. So as a non-technical person in a technical world, I always have the tendency to make it seem more simple than it really is. But you can see our models are really starting to hone in on that most valuable real estate, as we call it.
And is your vision, your United States focused, working with a single carrier today, do you think now that you have a POC up and running with that single carrier, does that give you an opportunity to reapproach those carriers that maybe said, we're going to do our own thing here? Does that give you a chance to expand this to those other carriers in the United States? Or are you thinking further afield now and saying, no, we're now ready to take this thing international?
Yeah, it's yes and. Yeah, so we have had shippers reach out to us recently about other carriers and could they do the same thing with another carrier? So that's obviously on our mind. We also know that this approach, as long as the network is a hub and spoke network, and Europe certainly is, and so as long as you have that repeatability, that high 90% of reliability of it's going to be delivered when it's supposed to, this works in all of those situations. So we do know that Europe is big, and Europe's not only big for the network, but it's also big on the sustainability side. We're getting a lot of requests from other carriers that they like the sustainability. They like going into checkout and offering at checkout a sustainability delivery option where the customers want that. And behind the scenes, what enables that is our software that basically says, I'm going to make this a green delivery because I'm going to take the time to look and try to connect those together. The more time you have, the better the connection is.
And I would imagine this would be very popular in places like Australia, where they have 4 or 5 major metropolitan areas, but the country is just ginormous. And so when we think of the hubs and the spokes can be in the middle of the sticks, in the middle of nowhere. And so it feels like the ANZ region in particular, maybe even Southeast Asia, it feels like this would be, obviously makes sense to start with English-speaking countries because that makes it easier for it to deploy the software, and it's probably hasn't been localized in any other language yet. So it feels, and also for the addressing infrastructure has to be pretty modern. Have you looked at Mexico at all? Because I'm living in Mexico now, and Mexico's a unique beast because many addresses in Mexico, they're not street addresses, they're actual pathway addresses. And so you've got a hillside of homes on a hillside, and they're not on a main street. They've got walkways that have their own unique addressing that's based on that walkway address. And so I'm wondering if you've looked at Canada, if you've looked at Mexico, if you've looked at LATAM, broader LATAM, or if this is something, hey, look, let's conquer the English-speaking world that use standard hub and spoke architecture, just like the US, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, we haven't looked at other countries. We have got so much work. We've got 5 implementations going on right now with some very large shippers. So our focus right now is to get this right. And to get the right thing is not only make sure that we can maximize the potential merge and create the delivery density, but it's also stay out of the way of the operations. So you can imagine the conversation that we have is, hey, by the way, if we're going to take all your order volume in, I'm going to give you back an answer. I'm going to move around your operational shipping patterns that the warehouse works on today. And that's what everybody says, whoa, I got a vibe going on in my warehouses. I don't want you to screw that up. And our answer is, here's the great news. We don't. We actually will mimic your same shipping, your warehouse operation pattern that you're doing today. But instead of doing FIFO for 100% of your stuff, you're going to do FIFO for 80%, 85% of your shipments. And that other 10 to 15 to 20%.
You're going to hold back and you're going to merge later.
And we're going to searchingly tell you when to ship them. But over the course of several weeks after you bring up our software, the volumes look exactly like your old volumes were. Right? You're still shipping. If you're used to shipping 10,000 packages a day from this warehouse, you can ship 10,000 packages a day from this warehouse. It won't change. We're just sliding things in. And that's our focus right now as we get, especially a lot of these larger shippers on board, is making sure that flow is exactly as expected.
And I'm guessing that you also potentially work with 3PLs as well, because they, in order to optimize their pick, back, and dispatch process, because ultimately it's not going to make it into the network, the actual carrier network, until they
Right.
do the pick, pack, dispatch process. And so if they can do the merge pre-network, then it feels like that's getting even further ahead of the curve, so that you can start affecting the merge further and further upstream before it actually even hits the delivery network itself, before it ever gets to the hub, is what I'm saying.
So that is exactly how we do it for everybody else as well, right? We're telling them to virtually hold it at the order management level, at the WMS. In other words, don't even put it into your picking, packing, shipping process until we tell you to. And then stick it into your process, because once you stick that process, we want it to go out. We're telling you when to ship it. So we don't want you to pick, pack, and hold it in the warehouse. So you could just imagine warehouses. I'm not doing that. If I'm picking, I'm packing, and I'm shipping it. So that is our software, is virtually hold it, inject it on the date we tell you to, and then it starts this process. The advantage that you have with 3PLs, and we are working with a couple of those right now, the advantage of the 3PL is not only can I merge it as a single shipper, I can merge it across all of my customers.
All of those merchants at the same time.
So you get an extra hit on merge across, let's say that I'm a 3PL running 10 different retailers, for example. I can not only merge at the carrier level, I can also merge at the, call it split shipment level, across the entire ecosystem of that 3PL. So I'm creating merges amongst itself, which is another big unlock percentages. To us, it's a percentage game, right? You get 2 or 3 percentages here, and another 2 or 3 here, and another 3 here. And before you know it, you've grown that 15 to 20% to 25 to 30%. And it just keeps growing on itself.
And is the reason you need to also have a relationship with the merchant is because of one of two scenarios? Either they're doing their own pick, pack, and dispatch function, and so therefore you need to integrate with their WMS before it hits the carrier network. Or two, the merchant needs to approve getting that green option, making that green option available to their customers in the checkout, and offering that new service layer as an option to the customer. Is it one or both of those things is why you need to have the relationship with the merchant?
Yeah, right now it's the first one, which is operationally making sure that we're telling them when to ship it, and
when to process the order.
Right, either they hold it at the order management level and don't drop it to the warehouse, or they drop it to the warehouse and they don't start waiving it until we tell them to. So there's that. We have had conversations with a number of retailers today that have already started to think through how they could put this into checkout, and I think that's coming. Especially as we talked about a few minutes ago, as Amazon is doing it, other retailers are starting to get really smart about, we should be doing that as well.
Optionality.
So they kind of, and we turn that on. So I think there's both of those going on. And there's another reason, which is when we grab the data, when we take the data from the shipper, we're only talking about pieces of data. It's the origin, where it's shipping from. It's where it's shipping to. Street, city, state, zip. It's the customer promise date that's been given. It's the order number and the warehouse order number. That's all we're grabbing. Mm-hmm. So we don't care about name, credit card. There's none of that kind of information do we care about. And then what we give them back is we give them back a ship date, and we give them back a billing token that helps them if they get a lower price for this shipment. So there are possibly security concerns that we work it out with the shippers on, making sure that we only use their data in the time we need it, and then it's gone after X number of hours or days. So there's some of that, even though we're not hitting major PI, we're not hitting major data, it's still data that we're collecting that we get rid of. And so we do have, for the number of shippers, security documents that we're signing to say, here's what we're doing. And they kind of have their security approach to look at it and go, okay, you guys are good, or if you need to look at this or change this or whatever it is.
Makes sense. And so is it, when you think of your sales approach and you go to market approach, do you think it's easier to leverage a relationship with a very large retailer? Let's say they got a chain right across the whole of the United States, and they say, look, we want to do this. We want to do this with you. And then if they effectively sign on the dotted line, then that gives you leverage to go and talk to their carrier or carriers to get them on board, because it needs to work with kind of both. Or is it the other way around, that it's better if you take the leverage of, hey, we already work with this carrier. Do you want to extend it to your customers? Or is it very situation dependent?
It's actually just the opposite. It's actually the carrier actually owns the customer. because think about it from their perspective, they're negotiating with each one of these shippers on what their gain share savings are going to be. And it's a one by one kind of thing. So they're the ones that actually come to us and say, I've got a shipper one or shipper two or shipper three that's interested in this program. And we can run some historical models through our system and say their potential looks like X. And then they build that into their pricing model.
Proposal effectively for that merchant.
And I can tell you that the shippers that we have that we're working with, we would have never gotten on our own. And as a small startup, we wouldn't even be allowed through the revolving door, the security guard. So by having that carrier and their relationship, it has dramatically increased the types of customers that we can talk to.
And is your focus non-flag carriers initially, meaning not USPS, not New Zealand Post, not Australia Post? Are you saving the flag carriers till last? Because it feels almost like flag carriers are so, I mean, they come from the Pony Express days. Like that's where they literally originated. And so when we think about antiquated carrier networks, antiquated technology, antiquated APIs, antiquated data, the data formats that they're going to try to get into your hands so you can crunch the numbers, it feels like the flag carriers would be amongst the most difficult in the world to get integrated with.
Yeah, they would. The one thing that you need for our software to work is you need repeatability. You need to have a delivery, a high degree of delivery success on a repeatable basis. You need to have a network that just flows, that doesn't just stop and start and stop and start. So from that perspective, this really works because really, think about it, we're not trying to affect it. Once it's in the network, we're not trying to affect it. All we're trying to do is get it into the network on a certain day and let the network do its thing. So if the network doesn't do its thing, you might have successfully got it on the right day, but things blew up along the delivery cycle, then nobody won. So you have to have a really good degree of, if you inject
confidence,
it's going to happen. So that's where we stay focused in on the carriers that are doing that the best.
Amazing. And if as part of our podcast, we'll put your contact details, your LinkedIn profile, we'll put the Eighth Notch website link in there. But if people want to get a hold of you, if they're a merchant in the United States and they're doing some significant volume and they want to reach out and they want to talk to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you and open a dialogue around this? Because it's obviously going to benefit them. It's going to benefit their customers. It's going to benefit hopefully their carrier rates. And I know that whilst you primarily deal with the carriers, there may be some merchants out there that say, hey, look, let me go and put hopefully some asset on my main carrier because I do a lot of volume with them and maybe get you in to be able to have a conversation with them. Yeah, and we definitely we have conversations with a number of shippers today before we even actually have that conversation with the carrier. And we're happy to start that conversation before we actually bring the carrier on. I would say email jsapp@t8notch.com or call me 415-802-5525. Always available. Love it. It's exciting. And presumably, like you've already said, you make your money by effectively clipping the ticket on the savings that you can verifiably generate. What's on your immediate radar over the next 6, 12, 18 months from a platform perspective? What would you like to bring functionally to your platform that you don't do today? Yeah, I think you touched on it earlier, and that is getting into checkout with the idea of a sustainable delivery or a green delivery button at checkout. So go beyond the standard, the next day and the 2-day, but go on to the sustainable delivery and then flowing that into our application underneath is probably the most critical one that we would have. The other one that we also talked about is proximity merge or smoothing out the network. It's not really a merge, but it's moving things around. As carriers have gone to these extended service charges for zip codes that are possibly hard to get to, especially in the inner city, rural, is there a way to create an opportunity where there's savings there? And our model is always about the gain share. If the carrier saves, the retailer saves, or we get a little bit of that as well, then we're always looking for those kind of unlocks. At checkout means that the end consumer now saves, and that drives a higher participation of merge underneath and density overall. Absolutely love it. Jamie, as we come down to the end of our time together, and I do so appreciate your time. This was a massive learning experience for me, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. Now's the chance where I get to flip the script and I get to hand the microphone over to my guest, let them ask me one question, any question they like. So, Jamie Sapp from the Eighth Notch, what is your question for me today?
I'm struck with two actually, but I'm gonna
You can ask two.
I'll ask two. The first one I'm sure everybody asks is, how'd you get into this business?
E-commerce or
Podcasting.
Yeah, look, that's a fabulous question. For me, I didn't see any content out there like I wanted to see. So there's many amazing e-commerce podcasts out there already, but they primarily focused on merchant stories and digital marketing. That's the primary focus. And because my primary background is technical and operational in nature as it relates to e-commerce, so I understand marketing and understand how that works and how the technology supports the marketing function, how a full stack architecture has to take into account marketing, etc. But because my focus has always been primarily on ops and tech, I didn't see any e-commerce podcasts out there focusing heavily on ops and tech. Now, there's a couple that have come along since that have focused. There's actually a podcast called The Operators, and they're an e-commerce podcast focusing specifically on the operational aspects of e-commerce. But at the time, that didn't exist. And so basically, I wanted to put something into the world that was interesting to me and that I wished existed in the world but didn't. And then the final piece is that for me, it's very difficult to have conversations with really smart people just by hitting them in their inbox in LinkedIn and saying, hey, can I borrow you a virtual coffee and shoot the crap for 15 minutes and talk shop? Yeah. But when you've got a podcast that has over 350 episodes now, the opportunity for somebody to say yes and it be beneficial to them, because oftentimes if you're just reaching out via DM, they think you're trying to sell them something. And so they automatically say no. That's like their gut reaction is no, piss off, basically. Whereas with this podcast and through this podcast, I get to have conversations with super genius people like yourself doing super cool stuff in our industry. And it opens an opportunity to have a dialogue that you just can't get any other way. So those are the two biggest motivators. And it's just this industry has treated me exceptionally well. And I wanted to be able to tell the stories or help tell the stories of people that wouldn't normally get airtime in our industry, because there's pockets of genius all across our industry, all around the world. And it was my goal to just basically expose that to a really big audience.
Second question. Why Mexico?
Very good question. Lots of reasons. Born and raised in Southern California, lived in New Zealand for almost 30 years. And my wife's a Kiwi. My brother-in-law's a Kiwi. My grandfather was a Kiwi. I've got lots of ties down under. My immediate family, my sister, my brother-in-law, my sister, and two nephews all live in Brisbane, Australia now. And I don't know how much knowledge or experience you guys had about what happened in New Zealand during COVID, but it was one of the most locked down countries in the world, border closed. It was pretty rough. The loss of freedom was pretty extreme, especially for those of us that chose not to get vaccinated. There was two tiers of society, basically. You had two levels of freedom. People that got jabbed had a level of freedom that was very different to the people that didn't get jabbed. And so for us, my wife and I, we were like, we are never, ever going to put ourselves in the position of ever having our personal rights and freedoms infringed like that again. We will never do it. And Mexico handled it just about as good as you can ask any country to handle COVID. They kept their borders open. They didn't require a PCR test to enter. Their economy boomed because they were very reasonable about how they managed COVID internally within the country. Because there's so many people living hand to mouth here, or paycheck to paycheck. You can't just shut down the country. You just can't do it. And so they were very reasonable about letting people continue to be productive and work as best as possible. And so we just felt there was many reasons: the food, the culture, the climate, the proximity to the U.S. for business and conferences and speaking events, and a lot of my clients based in the United States. So there were many motivations, but the straw that broke the camel's back was we got to get the hell out of this country before this happens again, because we know there's another pandemic coming, guarantee it. Bill Gates will make sure that happens. So the reality is there's another pandemic coming, and we don't want to end up being a prisoner in our country for 3 years.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's definitely a lot of lessons to be learned in the last 5 years.
Yeah,
a lot of lessons to learn. I think 100 years from now they'll still be talking about what was right and what was mostly wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, Jamie. This conversation has been fantastic. I've learned an absolute ton. I super appreciate the time that you've spent with me. Can't wait to speak to you again soon, my friend.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Jason.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.